Masechet Beisah, daf 36, and what a daf it is. One of my favorites, a lot of very important and fascinating topics. We're starting off with the question of how much exertion is too much exertion. Even on Shabbat and Yom Tov, if you're doing something permitted, still you shouldn't do something that requires too much effort. And we're going to compare two laws of Yom Tov and Shabbat. We started doing this a bit yesterday. We're going to see three more cases. And then we're going to move on to covering an item that's mukseh. Obviously, you can't move an item that's mukseh, but can you move something else that is not mukseh to cover and protect something that is mukseh? We dealt with this question all the way back in the beginning of the Masechet on Daf Gimel. If you have an egg that was laid on Yom Tov and is mukseh, can you take a bowl that is not mukseh and cover it in order to protect it? So now, near the end of the Masechet, we're coming back to this. We'll see two opinions and then six challenges to them. Then we're going to talk about leaks and moving bedpans, and then the next Mishnah about Shivut laws. So let's begin to review. We saw yesterday that on Yom Tov, the Mishnah said, you have fruit on your skylight, fruit on your roof that's out there to dry, and it's all ready. But now it's about to rain and you don't want it to get ruined. So you're allowed to push some of the fruit down the skylight so that it will be protected. That's Yom Tov. On Shabbat, we saw that you're allowed to move 4 or 5 boxes or baskets that you have in your room to make room for guests. But you can't move all of them. You can't move more than that. So now we're going to ask, I know you can't move all of it for Shabbat. How about for Yom Tov? Can I push all the fruit down the skylight or only some of it? And then we're going to ask the other way. For Yom Tov, you can move from house to house. You cannot move from house to house. What about on Shabbat? On Yom Tov, I'm not allowed to use ropes and ladders to put the fruit down into a window. How about on Shabbat? Can they use ropes and ladders to make room? So we're comparing these two, and we begin. Hatam tenan avalo et haosad. Regarding Shabbat in Masechet Shabbat, it says that you cannot remove all of the boxes in a storeroom, even if you're going to have a lot of guests, even if they're students who are coming to learn Torah. It's not permitted. Ve'amar Shemuel, my avalo et haosad, avalo yigmor et haosad kulo dilma ate lashvuye gumot. Shemuel explained that you cannot completely empty out the room, the storehouse, because once you move out all the boxes, then the floor will be revealed. And you'll see, oh, look, the floor has an indentation, it has a hole there, it's too high over here. And then you'll end up smoothing it out. And that is a full-fledged melacha of building. And so that's not allowed. Whereas if you just remove 1 or 2 boxes, then you're not going to notice the floor. But when you see the whole floor in front of you, that's a problem. So we know on Shabbat, you can move 4 or 5, but not all of the boxes of the room. So hachamai, what about on Yom Tov? Can I remove all of the fruit that's on the roof? Hatam hu b'Shabbat de'asur mishum de'hamir, av Yom Tov de'kil shapir dameh. On the one hand, maybe you'll say yes, it is allowed. Shabbat is very stringent. The punishment is stringent. The laws of Shabbat are very stringent. By Yom Tov, the punishment is less. So maybe we should be lenient on Yom Tov. Or you argue the opposite way. On Shabbat, why did I allow it? Because we want to make sure that the students have a place to sit and learn Torah. Otherwise, we're going to lose out on learning Torah. And if in that case you can't, then in this case of Yom Tov, where it's not about students coming, it's about saving fruit. So that's a less of an important reason. All the more so, it would not be allowed. And on Yom Tov, you also have to worry. Once I move all the fruit on my roof, I'm going to notice, hey, the fruit is uneven. There's a hole there. And I'm going to fill it in. And those are the two sides of it. We don't give an answer. And we're not going to give an answer to any of the 3 questions. We're going to end up with teku. So here is the second dilemma. Hacha tenan. Mashilin perot derech aruba b'yom tov. Amar Rav Nachman lo shenu ela beoto gag, ava migag legag lo. The Mishnah said you are allowed to throw produce down in the skylight, but you cannot move it to a next door roof. Let's say you have attached houses, but the roofs are adjacent. And so you don't have to carry, just go and push it over to your neighbor's roof because he has a skylight. Rav Nachman says you can't do that. That's considered too much work. Not only did Rav Nachman, the Amorah, say this, also there's a Baraita that agrees with this. So we know that on Yom Tov, this is not allowed. The question is, what about for Shabbat? Let's say I'm having guests over or students are coming over. Can I move these boxes to the neighboring house? Or would that be too much work? Hatamai. These next words are not found in any manuscript except for one. And that manuscript has a totally different thing. Somehow this made it into the printed editions, but it's removed in parentheses. And in fact, correctly removed, it does not belong. So here's the two sides. Maybe you'll say, over here, it's prohibited because of Yom Tov. Yom Tov in general, but this is the opposite of what we just said, because Yom Tov is generally a lighter punishment, people tend to regard it, to belittle it. So therefore, we have to be machmir on Yom Tov and make sure you don't go to your neighbor. But on Shabbat, which is already so stringent and people see it stringently, so maybe we can be more permissive on Shabbat and allow you to move it to the next door neighbor. That's one side of it. Or maybe you say, in the case of Yom Tov, you're going to lose out a lot of financial loss, and nevertheless, it's not allowed. In the case of Shabbat, where it's not about financial loss, I'm just moving the boxes somewhere else. I'm not going to lose them. So then all the more so, it would not be allowed to do it. And so that's the two sides of it. And now the third and last dilemma, hachat tenan, but it's really a braita, so we can change it to tanya. If you don't have a skylight, you cannot on Yom Tov take the fruit and put them in the basket and send them down by rope. And you also can't go up and down a ladder to bring them down. That's already too much work. You're only allowed to just throw it into the skylight. So hatamai. So we know that this is a chumrah regarding Yom Tov. What about on Shabbat? Let's say on Shabbat, I want to make space for the guests, and I want to do that by moving things up or down a ladder or using ropes to remove these baskets from the room. Maybe on Yom Tov it's not allowed because it's not interfering with Talmud Torah, but on Shabbat it's going to interfere with studying Torah, so Shabbat should be more permissive and therefore allowed. Or maybe you'll say the other way around, that it's not allowed even when I have financial loss on Yom Tov. On Shabbat, when it doesn't involve financial loss, then all the more so it's not going to be allowed. Teko, all these things are left standing. Literally means teko, like lakum comes from that root, and so these are left standing. I guess the idea is that back then these would be questions that would be offered to the students, and they would have to think about resolutions on each side. And you see how creative and fun this is, because we take Shabbat and Yom Tov, and there's good reasons to say, oh, well, losing money is more worse. Losing out on Talmud Torah is worse. How do you evaluate these two? Shabbat is more stringent. On the other hand, because Shabbat is more stringent, so we can be more lenient on it, because people generally view it that way. So there's a lot of fun and rich ways you can argue one way or another. And I think this Gemara just gives us a little bit of a taste of the types of arguments that one could expand on. It's kind of like an outline. This is almost like a curriculum, right? Here are three questions and more we had yesterday that you can throw out as students and see what sources they would bring this way and that way. All right, now the next one is going to be more filled out argumentation back and forth. We're going to see the question about covering mukseh items. Ula says you're allowed to take something not mukseh to protect a mukseh item. But Rabbi Yitzchak says no. If an item is mukseh, you can't move anything for it either. We'll have 2 challenges to Ula and then 4 challenges to Rabbi Yitzchak. altogether 6. I usually like there to be 7. A lot of times we have 7 as a nice number for structures in a sugya, but over here, there just aren't 7. Although the last one, the number 6, is going to have a long discussion, so maybe you can count that as 2 if you really want to. So let's see the case. Umechasin et haperot. Our Mishnah mentioned that if you have a leak in your roof and if you have fruit on your if you have fruit out, I can cover it if there's a leak or if it's raining, so in order to protect the fruit. Good. Amar Ula, vafilu avira de livneh. Ula said, not only fruit, even bricks. I have a row of bricks out there, and they're made out of mud or something, and the rain will ruin them. I'm allowed to cover the bricks, even though they're mukseh. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar perot re'uyin. Rabbi Yitzchak says, no, only fruit that can be eaten, that I can cover because that's not mukseh. Otherwise, no. Rabbi Yitzchak says this explicitly as a rule that you cannot move something unless it's to protect something else that is movable. You can move mukseh to protect something, move something not mukseh to protect something that is not mukseh, but it cannot move anything for the sake of something that is mukseh. So Rabbi Yitzchak is the stringent one, Ula is the lenient one, and now we have 2 questions on Ula. Tenan mechasin et perot bakelim. Our Mishnah says you can cover fruit. Perot in avera de libneh la. So the Mishnah mentioned the example of fruit. So it sounds like fruit is allowed because you can eat fruit. It's not mukseh. But it didn't mention anything about bricks. So the implication is that bricks would not be allowed. So it should not be allowed. Why do you say it is allowed? And his answer is, Hu adin dafilu avira de libneh. No, you're right. Really, even bricks would be allowed. Why did the Mishnah use an example of fruit? Because the first case in the Mishnah about drying fruit on the dried fruit on the roof that you can throw it down was already talking about fruit. So we continued talking about that example of fruit. But really, lav davka doesn't have to be fruit. Even if it was bricks that needed covering, it would be allowed. All right, he got out of that one. Tanan, second question on Ula. The next thing in the Mishnah was pitchers of wine or oil. These are also drinkable, usable things that are not mukseh, right? So isn't it talking about non-mukseh items specifically? And Ula can answer, we're talking about tebel. We're talking about wine and oil that you did not take teruma and maaser. And because of that, they are not usable and they are mukseh. So that's his answer. Now, this is interesting because if you remember, yesterday and the day before, we offered an argument based on the fact that tevel is not mukseh. That even if it's tevel, if you violated Shabbat and you went ahead and took teruma maaser, then you can eat that fruit. It's not mukseh. That is an argument we said yesterday. Over here, it says it's assuming that tebel is mukseh. So this is against that. Tosafot asked this question, and they try to harmonize it. I would just say it's a different shita. Over there, we're just using that argument to claim it, to try to prove this thing. And here, we're using the opposite argument to try to save Ula. So this is the kind of thing that could be this way, it could be that way, and you can use it in argumentation both ways. Okay, and this is actually a better reading of the Mishnah. Hachinami mistabera. If you think that as talking about regular wine and oil that you took to the Mamaseh and that you can drink, and it's not mukseh, well, then the previous case also already talked about produce. So you wouldn't have to give yet another example of something that is permitted. This next example must be talking about giving me a chidush. And so isn't this even a better reading, not just a neutral reading? And the answer is no. Now, the reason why it would add this example of pitchers is because I would have thought maybe if it gets totally ruined, then you're allowed to go ahead and cover it. But if it's only going to get a little bit ruined, then maybe not, because fruit that's just out and the rain comes on it, it'll be definitely ruined. If it's in a pitcher already, and some water is going to be added to the pitcher, so it's not going to be, it'll be less value, but it won't be totally ruined. So maybe in that case you can't. That's the chidush that of kadeh yain and kadeh shemen over just fruit. So it teaches us that even in the less substantial loss, still you're allowed to cover it. So that's why it's here. So this just rejects that it's a better reading, but it's still a possible reading. And so therefore, we answered both questions on ula from the fruit and the wine and oil. And now the next one is going to be a challenge to Rabbi Yitzchak. First, we're going to challenge him from a case of a leak, bricks, stones, and a beehive, which we're going to talk about a lot. So here we go. Tenan. Notnin keli tachat hadelef b'Shabbat. You're allowed to put a vessel in your house. Let's say that your roof is leaking and you want to catch the rain. It is permitted. Now, this water that's coming down, right? We presume that you don't usually drink water that leaks into your house, and yet you're allowed to move an object, a bowl, in order to catch this rainwater, even though the rainwater is mukseh. So this would be an argument that it is permitted to move an item for a mukseh item, and that's a challenge to the Beisah, who said you cannot do that. So the Beisah could answer, maybe it's clean leaking water, and you're like, oh, good, I have some more extra water here. So so therefore the leaking water is not mukseh, and that's why it's permitted. Okay, it could be. Next challenge. Tashema porsin machaselet al gabe levenim b'Shabbat. We have a braita that you can put a mat over bricks on Shabbat to protect them against the rain. And bricks are mukseh. So here it looks like I am allowed to move something to protect a mukseh item. That's a challenge to the Beisah, who didn't allow that. And the answer is, no, these are bricks that are not meant for a future building, but these are leftover bricks. You always order a little more than you need, because otherwise you might run out. So those extra bricks that are sitting or lying around, you use them to sit on a pile of bricks. That's a nice, makes a nice bench. And therefore, they're not mukseh, because they actually do have a permissible usage that's not for building. All right, he got out of the second one, the second challenge. Now the third challenge, Tashema. Porsin machaselet al gabe avanim b'Shabbat. You're allowed to spread a mat over stones. Stones are mukseh, aren't they? No, ba'avanim mekurzalot echazan lebet hakiseh. They're specially rounded stones, good shaped stones that are useful in the bathroom to clean oneself. Before the invention of toilet paper, they used small rocks. And so that would be okay. Happens to be my son right now is on Yam Liyam. He's camping out in Israel, going from sea to sea. And I told them, we don't know what bathrooms are going to be around. Bring toilet paper. I told them, actually, it's Daf Yomi. If you happen to run out of toilet paper, here's a good solution. Okay. Tashema. And now for the last one. Porsin machaselet al gabe kaveret devorim b'Shabbat. You're allowed to put a mat to protect a beehive on Shabbat. Beehive presumably is mukseh, and yet you're allowed to protect it. If it's too sunny and the sun will damage it, you can give it shade. Or if it's raining and the rain will damage the hive, you can cover it for the rain. Remember this line, we're going to be talking about it a bunch. And as long as your intention is not to trap them, let's say you're talking about, here is a beehive, maybe it has an opening on top, and then you cover it on top, and then that traps the bees. So if your intention is to trap the bees, then you shouldn't do that. But if your intention is not to trap the bees, but rather to protect the hive, then it's okay. You're allowed to do that. And here is a question against Rabbi Yitzchak, because here's a quick case where you're allowed to move something to protect an item that's mukseh, because this hive is mukseh, right? Well, he could answer, Hatam Nameh Dika Devash. Maybe it has honey in it, and therefore he had in mind, I'm going to take honey from the hive, and therefore the hive is in fact not mukseh. All right. Amar le Rav Ukba misheman le Rav Asher hatenach bimot hachama dika devash. So this is a challenge that Rav Ukva, in a later generation, asked Rav Asher. So this answer that we said over here is interesting because this answer is not given a name, right? Dika Devash. And yet Rav Ukva is asking a question on an anonymous answer, which is strange, interesting because usually anonymous we say is from later editors, but here, well, maybe they figured out what the answer is from this answer is from the question. Okay, anyway, he says this answer makes sense in the summer when there is in fact honey in the hive, but during the winter, during the rainy season, during the winter, there is not honey in the hive. So, Mike, what are you going to do that? What are you going to do about that? Right? Usually, the bees will store honey in the spring and summer, and then they have what to eat during the fall and winter. What the beekeepers do is they take out most of the honey at the end of the summer so that the humans can eat it, but they leave leave 2 honeycombs inside for the bees. That's enough for them. So that they can survive the winter, because you don't want to kill off all your bees. So he says, I understand that this would not be mukseh in the summer, but how about in the winter? And after all, look at these words here. It said in the summer, and it says in the sun, and it says in the rain, but we're assuming that means summer and winter. We'll see another assumption later. So therefore, this has to apply both in the summer and in the winter. So what are you going to do in the winter when there is no extra honey in it? So then wouldn't it be mukseh? And he could answer, oh, maybe for those 2 honeycombs that we leave in there, if I have in mind and I say, you know what, I want to eat those. I really want honey, and too bad for the bees. I plan on taking them for Shabbat, then they're not mukseh. So it's talking about a case where he had them in mind. Okay, good. Okay, so we accept that answer, except we have another problem. So you're implying that if I didn't have in mind to eat those 2 honeycombs that are meant there to be in the winter, then it would be prohibited to take them, right? So at the time, if you're telling me that this only applies when I had in mind to have the 2 honeycombs that are in the winter, which is a very unusual case, that's a really big okimta, a big assumption that you're putting there, then you should have mentioned that. And in fact, this baraita does mention a line in the end, a qualification, and it says, as long as you're careful not to trap. Right, it's bringing in this other consideration that by covering it, you're going to trap it. So before you gave a qualification, make sure don't intend to trap it. A better qualification, a more relevant one, is you should have said, as long as you had in mind that you had in mind that you were going to take these 2 honeycombs, but not if you didn't have in mind. Right, that would be a more immediate and more relevant, more important qualification to mention explicitly. So we said, you're right, and we're going to have to change the words a bit to make it fit. What we meant to say is, the Braita meant to say is, even if I had them in mind, if I have it in mind, it would be good. But even if I have it in mind, I have to make sure not to intend to trap the bees, because that would be not allowed. So we're going to sticking in this condition into the wording of the Braita, even though it doesn't fit into the words of the Braita unless you add those words. Okay, so now we answered the question. Now a question about the Braita in general, because this Braita had 2 parts. B'may okimta ke'Rabbi Yehuda. We assumed this whole time that this Braita must be according to the Rabbi Yehuda, who is stringent regarding mukseh. Remember the Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, they always have an argument about mukseh. So we were finding ways to explain why this beehive is not mukseh. It must be it had honey in it, and you wanted it in the summer, and in the winter it also had a little honey, and I had in mind I'm going to take it. So we're jumping all through hoops to figure out why it's not mukseh, which means that we're assuming that otherwise it would be mukseh. So that assumes the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, the mukseh. However, emasefa, but the very last line says, make sure not to have intention to trap. So intention matters. Who thinks intention matters? It's Rabbi Shimon, because according to Rabbi Shimon, if I intend to trap, then it's no good. That's a violation. You're not allowed to trap things. But if I don't intend to trap, then it's okay. Only the Bishimon would say it's okay if I don't intend to trap. According to the Yehuda, your intention doesn't matter. He would say, mitkaven asur. So the last line is Rabbi Shimon, and the previous we were assuming is Rabbi Yehuda. Does it make sense to have one Braita, half Rabbi Yehuda, and the end Rabbi Shimon? How are we going to explain this? So we say the truth is that ending is can't be Rabbi Shimon either. Even Rabbi Shimon, who is lenient regarding the mukseh, in a case where it's definitely going to happen, as definite as cutting off a head of a chicken and thinking it won't die, it will die, even if it's not your intention. So too, putting a mat on top of an opening of a beehive is going to definitely trap them. So even Rabbi Shimon would agree that if that intention doesn't matter here, even if you don't intend to trap them, it still would be prohibited. So it doesn't even help to say the ending is Rabbi Shimon. So how can we explain that last line of the Braita about trapping? Lolam kula Rabbi Yudahi, hacham eskinan di'it bekaveh. Oh, we're talking. It could be the Yehuda. We're talking about a beehive that has many windows, many openings, opening here on the other side, and so therefore there's no. I'm not actually trapping when I cover it, but I still have to make sure that I don't intend to trap it. To make this fit, we have to change the words. More words in this Braita. Poor Braita, we keep changing the words. And instead of reading it, as long as you don't intend to trap, read, as long as you don't make it as a trap, as long as you don't cover up all the holes. If you don't cover up all the openings, then it's okay. Wow. Now, and then in that case, it could be to be Shimon, it could be to be Yehuda also. So the whole thing could be to be Yehuda. Now, Pishita, isn't this obvious that you can't close up all the holes and actually trap them? What are you even telling me? What will be the point? I might have thought that I'm only not allowed to trap types of animals that people usually trap, like birds. That I can't. But bees, usually people don't trap bees. Maybe we're the opposite today. We trap bees in the sukkah because we don't get rid of them. Most of us aren't going around trapping birds. But in those days, you would trap birds because you want them. There would be no reason to trap bees. So I might have thought that trapping bees is not a problem. And therefore, it teaches me that even though people don't usually trap bees, nevertheless, it's not allowed. All right, so we explained that Braita, and now there's one last answer to the same question that we started off with regarding bees, as isn't a beehive mukseh? And we said, no, it has honey in it. Yeah, it has honey in the winter, right? But how about in the summer? How about in the winter? And Rav Ashi has a different answer altogether. Rav Ashi Amar. If you remember that Marukva asked this whole question to Rav Ashi. So maybe this is actually Rav Ashi's answer. Everything beforehand was another answer we tried out, but we answered it. It was okay, but we ended up having to change the words of the Braita. So without having to change the words, here's a simpler answer. Does that Braita say in the summer and in the winter? Doesn't say that. It says Bachamam b'nechama. When it's sunny out, you can protect it from sun. When it's rainy out, you can protect it from rain, katane. So maybe it's talking about spring and fall. Where there is both sun, sometimes some days it's sunny, some days it rains, and during those seasons, there is honey in it. And so therefore, we're not talking about the winter season when there's no honey in it. You don't have to reconcile the Braita with the case of winter. It didn't say winter. It just said rain, and it rains even during the in-between seasons. All right. So now we resolve that, and that takes care of B. And now we're going to go on to C about leaks and bedpans. So the Mishnah said, that you're allowed to put a bowl to catch water in your house on Shabbat. Let's say it's leaking a lot and the bowl gets full. You can empty out the bowl and put it back, and you can keep doing that, and you don't have to worry. No problem. So that's about taking out things, even though it's mukseh, that water. I know we said before that it's talking about a clean water that you would drink, but that was just an answer for the Beisah. It's not necessarily so. So even though the water is mukseh, you can still take it out because we want people to protect their house. It's okay. Now we have a fantastic story. Listen to the story. One time, Abaye, he had a mill in his mill house. And there was a leak in the mill house. And now the rain is coming through and falling on his mill. And his mill seems to have been made not just out of stone, but out of clay. And this rain is going to ruin his mill. And it's on Shabbat. And he wants to move the mill. It's a portable mill. He wants to move it out, but the mill is mukseh. So he has a problem. So Abaye goes to his teacher. What should I do? He says, here's what you should do. A loophole. Go get your bed and bring it into the mill house so that now that's your bedroom. Now, here's a special law regarding bedrooms that if you have something disgusting in your bedroom, even if it's mukseh, you're allowed to take it out, like a bedpan, right? If someone's sick and they need a bedpan, so they have it. You have to leave, and now the bedpan has no use. It's disgusting. It's mukseh. What do you want it for? But I don't want it in my bedroom because it's gross. So there's a special permission. You're allowed to move the bedpan out. So here you're doing the same thing. First, you're bringing your bed into the mill house, thereby making it your bedroom, even though it wasn't your bedroom before. And then you lie down there and you say, look at this disgusting mill over here. That's all ruined and it's horrible. I got to get it out of here. And then you can move your mill to a protected area. Okay, that's quite a loophole that he's giving him. And Abaye didn't want to accept it. He says, wait a second, you can't make a situation in which it will cause you to have a bedpan or make something disgusting on purpose. I mean, if it happens, someone's sick and they have to do that, okay, you do what you have to. But now you're going to make me bring my bed in so that I'll create a situation in which I'll be disgusted. Is this really allowed? So Abaye was not comfortable with the loophole. So he's thinking about it, trying to figure out if it's allowed or not. In the meantime, the whole mill house collapsed and ruined the mill, and he lost everything. He says, you know what? I had it coming to me that I lost the mill because I didn't follow the words of my master, Rabbah. I should have been unquestioning. He gave me the loophole. It's not up to me, the student, to think he's wrong and to be, holier than my teacher. I should have just done it. All right. Truth is, it's a good thing he wasn't lying down in the bed that he brought in there while it fell down. All right. So this is a good lesson, right? You don't have to be overly stringent when your teacher gives you a loophole. You can follow it. All right. Amar Shemuel geraf shara'i ve'abit shememed aglaim mutar lo siyan la'ashpa u'chshu machaziro noten bo mayim u'machaziro. So now another law regarding this bedpan that has excrement or one that has urine in it. You're allowed to move it and take it to the garbage. And when you bring it back, let's say you bring it back because maybe you'll need it again. I mean, you don't want to leave it out there. And so you should put water in it. So that way, the water, it's not drinkable water, but maybe you could give it to a pet or something. So now when you're bringing it back, you're not bringing something that's totally mukseh. You're bringing it back with the water, and that makes it more permissible to bring it back. So what do you mean now? When some of the sages heard what Shemuel said, they said, "Geraf shara'i agav mana in bifnei asmo Allah." See, it looks like you're allowed to take out the excrement when it's in a vessel. But let's say there's something disgusting in and of itself without a vessel. It sounds like I wouldn't be able to touch the disgusting thing by itself, only when it's in a vessel. That's what they thought to say. However, that's not true. Tashema dahu achbarta de ishtakach be ispar meke de Rav Asher, because one time there was a dead mouse that was discovered in Rav Asher's spice room. Ispar meke, nice Persian word, I wonder if it's related to the word pharmacy, which looks like it's in there. I don't know. Anyway, there was a dead mouse in there, and that's disgusting, especially in a spice room. So Amar lehu Rav Ashi, nakta besusita v'apeku. Says take it by the tail and remove it. In other words, you don't have to go get a shovel and remove it with a vessel. You can touch it directly and take it out. And so it just happens to be usually if it's excrement, we're going to use a pan or a vessel. But if it was something that you need to touch directly, also you could take it out. So this is another case where the mukseh laws are meant to keep us away from things that are prohibited. But you also don't want to ruin your Shabbat and Yom Tov by having to have something disgusting around in the room that you're living in. And so the rabbis are lenient in that regard. All right, now we begin the next very, very important Mishnah that says, Kol shechayavim alav mishum shivut, mishum reshut, mishum misvah. B'Shabbat chayavin alav b'yom tov. B'Shabbat chayav alav b'yom tov. Okay, anything that you are chayav, that you're not allowed to do because they fall into one of the following three categories, and we're going to explain the three categories in a minute. Category one is shivut, something that's not a restful act. Reshut is something that is an optional act. It's not a mitzvah, but also cannot be done on Shabbat. As something that might be a mitzvah. It is a mitzvah to do in general, but you still can't do on Shabbat. All these things that you can't do on Shabbat, you also cannot do on Yom Tov. In other words, Shabbat and Yom Tov are equal in regard to the following three categories. Now, the language here, kol shechayavin, is interesting because chayavin usually means that you'll be chayav hatat on Shabbat, chayav malkut if you did on purpose on Yom Tov. And yet all of these things, one is not liable to any punishment. The Bavli we're about to see is going to explain them as midrabanan, gezerot. Tanaitic sources, I have an article on this Mishnah. I'm happy to share it with anyone who asks. That shows, and I'm not the first one to point this out, that the Tanaitic sources treat this category as asur mideoraita, but with no punishment. So, and no matter what, none of these have a punishment. So the word chayav here, you have to understand, simply means it's not allowed, like asur, but not actually that it's prohibited with a punishment. Okay, anyway, so these things are not allowed to do both on Shabbat and on Yom Tov. What are they? Velohen mishum shivut. The following category are not restful. Velo olin ba'ilan. Should say just lo olin be'ilan, velo rochmin al gabe behema, velo shatin al behamayim, velo metapechin, velo mesapekin, velo merakedin. To climb a tree, that's not a restful act. I'm going to explain the Mishnah according to what I think is the Peshat. It's not restful to go climbing trees on Shabbat. And riding animals is also not a restful thing, besides the fact that you're using the animal, and that would seem to be going against the Ten Commandments. Okay, but maybe you'll say, the Ten Commandments say, let your animal rest. That's talking about using it to plow a field. But maybe just riding it is not as bad as using it for agriculture. Nevertheless, it's not restful for a person to be riding animals. And you cannot float on water. Shatin does not mean swim. I don't know why they translate that here that way. It means float, which means technically you're allowed to walk in water. You can go to the ocean and put your feet in. You just can't lift your feet up, because then that would be floating. And that's not restful also. I mean, swimming for sure is not good, but swimming or floating is not a restful activity. I know floating sounds like it's restful, but it's still exercise. This means not, you can't clap your hands, you can't clap your hand onto your thigh or dance. And I think it means stomping. And the Tosefta that gives these as examples of if you're scaring away birds because you want to protect your produce, so you would clap or stomp. Because it's making too much noise. I think that's the original understanding of this Mishnah. You can't do noisy and unrestful things on Shabbat. That's category number one. Category two, these are all things that have halachic significance, that it's not like you have to do these things ever. But if you happen to be a judge, it's a good thing to do, but you're not obligated to do it. Anyway, you can't be a judge on Shabbat and judge a court case. You can't do kiddushin on Shabbat. If you want to be betrothed to a woman, you can't do that all week long, but not on Shabbat. You can't do chalitza or yibum, if a man dies without children, and either the person wants to be with the woman to do yibum or do the shoe ceremony to not so that she can be free. These are all good things to do, but not on Shabbat. The Gemara will ask, aren't these actually mitzvot? Okay. The following things are a wonderful mitzvah to do whenever you do them. Nevertheless, not on Shabbat. Lo makdishin. Don't make something hekdesh and say I'm donating it. Velo ma'arichin, velo ma'acharimin. Other kinds of donations. Ma'arichin is I say I give my worth. I donate myself, my worth to the Bet HaMikdash, or I say cherem. This is going to be unusable, consecrated. So these are all nice donations to make, not on Shabbat. And you cannot separate to the Ma'aseh on Shabbat, even though that is also a mitzvah, but you're taking something unusable, making it usable, so not appropriate. And in conclusion, Kol elu b'yom tov amiru, kal v'chomer b'Shabbat, en b'yom tov l'Shabbat, ela ochel nefesh bilvad. All these things we said regarding Yom Tov are not allowed, and all the more so, it's not allowed on Shabbat, because the only difference between the two is food preparation, cooking and carrying relating to food is allowed on Yom Tov and not on Shabbat. In all other ways, Shabbat and Yom Tov are equal. Okay. In fact, you can find other small examples in which there are some discrepancies between Shabbat and Yom Tov regarding some details of mukseh and things, but in major categories of melacha, those are the only differences. And therefore, you see this Mishnah has a nice chiastic structure. It starts off saying that these are not allowed on Shabbat and also Yom Tov, and it ends off saying not allowed on Yom Tov and also Shabbat. All right, we'll just begin the first little bit of discussion of these categories. Lo olin ba'ilan, why can't you climb a tree? So now I explained this according to the Peshat, that these are all deoraita because they're not restful. The Bavli is going to give a different set of reasons. Because if you climb a tree, you're going to go up there and say, oh, look at this nice coconut. And you're going to remove a coconut or a branch as you are climbing. And so you're going to come to violate a full-fledged deoraita. You can't ride an animal because when you're riding an animal, you go far. And then you're not going to think about the Shabbat limit, 2,000 amot, and you're going to go and go too far. So it's too easy to travel fast on an animal and be in violation of Techum, like Elisha Acher does. So that's answer number one. But then we say, Shema mina Techumin deoraita. Wait a second. Should we infer from here that Techum, Shabbat, is a deoraita law? This is a huge discussion elsewhere. Is Techum deoraita or Rabbanan? Now, you'd only make a gezerah if it was something that was deoraita. You make a gezerah that lest you come to do a deoraita. You wouldn't make a gezerah if it was just a Rabbanan, if you might lead to a Rabbanan. And so therefore we say, well, we have never established that Techum is deoraita. So this is not really an answer that we can accept. Ela gezerah shema yachtoch zemora. No, okay, different answer. It's the answer reason is because if you're riding an animal and you want to go faster, you might see a branch and remove it from the tree to use it to whip the animal to make it go faster, and then you'll violate taking off the tree. Now, if this seems far-fetched, it's interesting because it's not actually the original reason. The Gemara gives one reason first and then says, no, that's not good, and backs into another reason. So you see the Talmud Bavli itself doesn't seem to have a tradition that these are the reasons, but rather it's figuring out what the reasons would be. What would be the best reason that we would be afraid of? But you see that the prohibition comes first, the reasons come later. And I think the Bavli is doing this because if you say it's asuma doraita but no punishment, you're like, well, then maybe I'll take that lightly. And there's evidence that people were taking these lightly. If, however, you say you're going to come, if you start doing this, it's going to lead to a violation of a full-fledged melacha that is punishable, then people will take it more seriously. So I think the Bavli is giving these not as the original reasons for the laws, but as a support so that people will take these laws more seriously. I think you see that from this discussion. All right, two more. You can't swim, float, because you may come to make a swimmer's barrel, a flotation device. Sometimes people translate this as you might come to make a boat, and then they make fun of it. It says, how are you going to go make a boat? But it doesn't say a boat. It would be like a simple flotation device, like maybe out of wood, or you take a gourd and hollow it out and stop it up, and just something that you can hold on to if you need to learn how to swim. And so you might create something like that. And so you're not allowed to float because you'll realize I don't know how to swim, and then you'll go make a flotation device. And lastly, you cannot clap or slap or stomp because you may come to fix a musical instrument. And this is also a huge change because the original reason here is to make a lot of noise. It's about not making too much noise on Shabbat. But you see that the Bavli says because you might fix a musical instrument, which implies that it is about making musical sound, not just noisy sound. And therefore, this leads to a real practical question. What if you're making noise, but it's not for music, like just giving applause? I think according to the original Mishnah, applause would not be allowed. According to the reason that it's music, so applause is not to a beat, so maybe that would be allowed. Or knocking on a door, so someone opens it. And the original reason, that's noisy. Don't use a knocker. Some people actually have a custom not to use a knocker. Rama brings it. But according to this reason, well, you just can't make a beat when you're using a knocker, but just to make noise would be okay. So there are very significant implications to these reasons. But here we see that the Bavli gives the reasons of a gezerah, and we'll see the rest of this discussion of this fascinating Mishnah tomorrow. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.